Hello you guys, Mr. Medellin here, Mr. M. I like this little intro thing that they put on the board here. That's kind of nice, it's kind of cute, I like that. But today we're going to be doing digital processing. And again, you guys, this is kind of just a quick rundown through the system. I try not to go into too much detail. Again, I want you guys to read the book, but I'm going over all the basics, all the key terms. So if you like to give me a question or a comment, please do so, and I'll try to respond as soon as I can. But we're going to be covering digital processing systems, and I'm going to give you guys kind of, like I said, a brief overview of how the images are being produced without going into super detail. But again, I want to try to keep all the key terms still involved with this. So whenever you guys get an x-ray done, all right, and if you guys have ever been a patient, the order is prescribed, correct? It's prescribed. So the prescription is going to go into the system. It's going to be scanned. It goes into the system, and it's going to be underneath what we call the hospital information system, the HIS. And this is going to be part of your electronic health record, okay? So your health system is going to have patient demographics. It's going to have our name, date of birth. It has, our insurance information. It has, our address. And a lot of times we can go back to that, especially when you get an order on your screen, your workflow, and you call the patient in, or you have the patient, they don't look the age. You can always go back to that to verify it, to make sure they're the correct patient. But we have the hospital information system, that's a HIS, and you have electronic health records, electronic medical records or health records inside of that system. So that's the prescription. Now, let's say you as a tech now, you're looking at your modality work list, okay? So your modality work list is your workflow. This is your workflow. So you get your orders. So let's say you have patient Robert Medellin. You have my date of birth. You have my ordering physician. Let's say it's Dr. Santos. Dr. Santos ordered, let's say, forearm X-ray. So it says 2-view right forearm X-ray on there, right? So all that information on your workflow. Well, believe it or not, that's part of your RIS. That's your radiology information system. So your RIS is your radiology information system. Now, back in the days, we had to open up and close things separately, but now, I know that we have upgraded technology and applications, but this is still relevant to the textbook. There's an application called HL7. HL7, Health Level 7, is going to integrate these two systems that allow us to go ahead and access the information of the patient and the radiology information. So we have the modality work list, we have the HIS here, correct? So then you're going to go ahead, before you do the exam, you're going to go to your acquisition menu, we said. Your acquisition menu is going to be your part selection. All right, so you're going to select, we said AP form, and there's two projections for the form. So you select AP form, correct? And when you select AP form, there's going to be a special algorithm that's going to be used to give us the grayscale that's needed for that AP form. So how does that work? Well, there's something called the lookup table, the LUT. So LUT stands for a lookup table. I remember somebody was telling me they had a question on LUT, and I'm like, I don't know what LUT is, right? But it was, can you spell LUT? And they're like, LUT. I'm like, oh, that's lookup table, right? So lookup table is going to assign an algorithm, okay, a processing algorithm that's going to have a preset scale, right? And that's a preset grayscale for the object that you're x-raying. So obviously you're doing a form, so that's going to be high contrast, that's a short scale, correct? So there's also a reference histogram that's going to be applied as well. Okay, so there's a reference histogram. A histogram is just a graphic representation of the tone values that should be recorded during the exposure. So there's a preset one, and there's one that shows up after you make the exposure. So all of these things are happening before you even make the exposure. Okay, so everything's predetermined. So again, AP elbow, or AP form, I should say, a lookup table says, you know what, I need an algorithm to go ahead and give me the grayscale to process this image to give us the amount of densities and brightness levels that we need for that body part. Does that make sense? All right, so now let's go ahead and we're gonna make the exposure. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna put my forearm here. So I'm putting my forearm down here just like this, my forearm. We're gonna go ahead, let's create an image using a flat panel detector, okay? So we're gonna have a flat panel detector. So you set your MA, you set your KV, you set your SID, everything's there. You collimate, right? Put your marker, don't forget your marker. I don't like this annotation stuff. Put your marker. We're doing a left forearm, so you put your left forearm marker here, so left marker. Now you go ahead, give your patient instructions. You're gonna go ahead and make the exposure, correct? Now, when you make the exposure, x-rays are gonna go through, correct? Now, this is just a little quick rundown again. X-rays are gonna either be absorbed through the photoelectric effect, or they're gonna go ahead and scatter, right? They're gonna scatter. What interaction with matter is responsible for scatter? You remember? Compton, that's right. So Compton is gonna scatter, or the x-rays can go through, okay? We call that exit or remnant radiation. So that's your image forming radiation. So if you ever ask the question, what is your image forming radiation? It's gonna be your exit radiation, correct? So now you're gonna have radiation hit the detector, correct? Some of it will be absorbed, right? Some of it's gonna go through, that's your radiolucent areas. The radiopaque objects are gonna attenuate the radiation. So now you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna hit the flat panel detector. You know what? Let's make this an indirect capture detector since we're at it. All right, so again, that's in a separate little lecture that we did, a little video. This is an indirect capture flat panel detection system. So now what's gonna happen, the x-rays are gonna hit a scintillator. This is just a quick rundown again. It's gonna hit a scintillator. The most common that we use is, you guys remember? Cesium iodide, that's right. So now light is going to be produced. So you're going to have light. Now the light that's produced is going to hit a photodiode material, photodiode. The photodiode is going to be made of amorphous silicon, right? Okay, not selenium, right? So, but silicon. So photodiodes is going to be comprised of amorphous silicon. The amorphous silicon, the photodiode, is converting the light to electrical signal, we said, right? So now you got a bunch of electrons here, and the electrons are going to hit the receptor themselves, and there's a bunch of TFTs, that's right. There's TFTs all throughout this here. Okay, so here's the TFT. So the TFTs are going to be binned together. They're going to be like in a checkerboard pattern. And the x-rays are going to hit the TFTs. Well, guess what? Electrical signal, that's a charge, correct? So guess what? The voltage, there's a voltage that already exists in the TFT. So when you have an extra charge hitting the TFT, guess what it's going to do? It's going to change the charge within that little section. There's a gate that opens and closes, right? So you're going to change. So you change the charge within each of that section. And guess what? That change of the voltage is going to be assigned a numerical value. That's quantification. All right, so you have a change of voltage, and then you have a number or tone value assigned to that. That's known as quantification. All right, so you have a signal that's being converted into now a number. That number is going to be represented as a tone value later on. Okay, so we took our x-ray of our forearm here. So now we have a recording of signal, correct? So during this time, we have SNR happening. We have signal to noise ratio. You always want high signal, low noise, right? There's always some type of noise inherent in all our systems, right? We talked about dark noise coming from the computer system itself, right? So SNR, high signal, low noise, right? We have here MTF and DQE. Modulation transfer function, right? The fidelity of the signal. Remember, it can never exceed the sum or the whole of that number. It can never be more than 1, right? MTF is going to be the trueness of the signal. DQE was detective quantum efficiency. So how much of that signal is being used, the input signal, how much of that signal is being used to create the image? That's output. So DQE is a predetermined amount of exposure of x-rays that should strike the detector, right? It's predetermined. So your key terms for DQE are input versus output, and predetermined percentage of exposure, right? We have this, we have the Nyquist theorem occurring, all right? So again, we have to have twice the sampling of the bandwidth, correct? I love this analogy for Nyquist. You measure twice, you cut once. I love that. One of my students was a carpenter, and he said, Mr. Ram, he goes, you know what, in carpentry, we say we have to measure twice before we cut it, so we don't have any issues, you know, of cutting, you know, incorrectly. So Nyquist theorem is going to occur, sometimes known as the Nyquist criteria, or the Nyquist theorem, or the Nyquist theory, okay, all the same thing. So we have that, we have rescaling. Rescaling is going to occur. So rescaling is going to be known as also as automatic rescaling. Sometimes it's known as histogram modification, histogram stretching, because guess what? If you're off with your technique, you just took my x-ray of my forearm, which should have been like 64 kV, maybe at 2.5 mass, but you shot it at, let's say, I don't know, 66 kV at 3.65 mass or whatever. We're just making up numbers. If you're off in technical factors, guess what? The system says, don't worry, I got you. The automatic rescaling, the histogram modification is going to adjust it for you. It's going to go ahead and default to that preset scale of contrast that we said that the histogram was telling you this is what you should have. So you're going to have Nyquist theorem, automatic rescaling. You're also going to have a histogram analysis occur. So if you remember, you had a histogram that was preset. So a histogram, I'm just going to draw it on the board for you guys, is a graphic representation of tone values demonstrated on the image. Okay, so if you have a narrow histogram, you're going to have low contrast because the differences are not going to be that great. If you have a histogram, I'll draw it on this side, that has a wide amount of tone values that are different, that's going to be a bigger difference. That's high contrast. Okay, so that's where it gets a little funky because it's not really related to short and long scale anymore, right? So the histogram is going to be looking a little different. But again, it's measuring all the recorded signals, all the tone values, and it plots them out on a graph. So again, a histogram is a graphic representation of tone values that are recorded. Now remember, it's going to pick up all the tone values from very minimum to very maximum. Whatever's in your area, your field of view of exposure, that's what it's going to go ahead and record. But it also takes into account the other signals it's recording as well. So histogram analysis, if you have too much scatter, if you have the wrong body part selection, it can cause a histogram analysis error because now you're adding signals that weren't supposed to be there, right? So that can throw it off a little bit. But guess what? We have our friend rescaling here. And rescaling is going to fix the image for you. So it's like the computer is going to fix the image. And this is where I think us as techs kind of get a little lazy and we don't think about our technique so much. But this is where you have to make sure you master the art of technique as well. So you're not having to go ahead and change the image once it's produced. All right. The other term that we have here happening is edge enhancement. Edge enhancement is part of your local processing. Edge enhancement is known as high pass filtering. So I think about being on a high edge and looking down, right? So high edge, right? You're looking down. High pass filtering means it's going to suppress the low frequencies that are also being recorded. So it suppresses the low frequencies, allows the high frequencies to come up to create a bigger separation between the object. In fact, it enhances the edges, right? So high pass filtering. Then, I'm going to erase this here. We have something called smoothing. All right. Smoothing. My brother's into lowrider cars, and I think about low and smooth, right? He's got a 64 Chevy Impala, and he just took my son out for his girlfriend and my son to prom, and they got to ride in the Impala, right? But I just remember, man, look how low and smooth that is, right? So smoothing is low pass filtering. Low pass filtering. Okay. So low pass filtering, it does the opposite. It suppresses the high frequency and allows the low frequency system to come in. But you never want to just have a low pass filtering system to go through. You want to be able to use both, okay? So we got SNR, we got MTF, DQE, Nyquist theorem. We got rescaling, histogram analysis, edge enhancement, smoothing. Let's talk about post-processing. All right, so now we have all of these things happening, correct? So let's go ahead now. Let's look at our image on a monitor. So let's say we are looking at the computer screen. All right, so here's your computer monitor. Now let's draw my forearm. So here's my forearm, and it's my left forearm, so I drew my radius on the outside, because you're gonna have the radius on the outside. Here's my marker, right? Left marker is there, not in the anatomy. We're collimated, right? So when you have the area behind the anatomy blackened, you have a blackened border, that's gonna be known as shuttering. So shuttering is a post-processing that we have now. So when you have a blackened border here behind the object, that's known as shuttering. All right, that's shuttering. Now shuttering removes the veil glare, the distraction of bright light around the object, right? So we have shuttering. Now, if you wanted to go ahead and make it a little bit smaller, you can crop it. But remember that cropping and shuttering does not replace collimation. Shame on you if you're doing that, okay? So again, shuttering and cropping is also going to be part of post-processing. So I'm going to write this on here, guys, post-processing. Now, those things are usually going to maybe occur automatically. It'll be cropped for you, it'll be processed for you, you have shuttering behind you. So that's going to be always there maybe, or sometimes you have to do it maybe on your own. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is windowing. But before we talk about windowing, I want to tell you guys, in the corner here, you're going to have an exposure indicator. So an exposure indicator is a number that's going to show up. And let's say we're working with, let's see, what are the systems that we're talking about today? We're talking about Carestream, Rayance, right? So let's say you're working with a system like Carestream or Rayance. They have EI or EXI. Exposure index or exposure index EXI. So you're going to have an exposure indicator. This number is showing you how much exposure was recorded by the receptor itself. It does not quantify patient dose. It's an indication of what the patient might have received, but it doesn't quantify patient dose. So you're going to have an exposure indicator. All right, in some systems you have EI or you have EXI. You can have LGM for Agfa systems, or you can have S for Fuji, Konica, Philips, Minolta, right? All of these, you guys, are just different representations of the exposure indicator. Over here, it's going to say WW and WL maybe. It can be different depending on your system, but WW is window width, WL is window level. Now let's say you're off on your technique a little bit and you want to change it. So what you can do is you can modify it. And when you modify it, let's say you want to go and change the density. If you make a change in density, which is going to affect the brightness, that's known as window level. Okay? So brightness and density is window level. When you change the density, it's going to have an impact on the brightness. A lot of times we can drag our finger up and down vertically. Sometimes they have arrows or they have little buttons you can guys go up and down. Window level, you change the density. I was talking to a student today and I said, imagine if we're outside during the day and you start to go up in the floors of our building here, it's gonna get brighter. But if you start to go down, you go into the basement or into the parking structure in the very bottom, it's gonna get darker. That's window level, right? Window width was the scale of contrast. Window width, I think about the width of contrast. So when you start to change the ratio of black and white, okay, ratio of black and white, you're changing the contrast, and that's going to be window width. Okay, so window width is the contrast, the grayscale. Window level is going to be the density. It's going to have an effect on the brightness. Now, when you start to do these things and you're doing them all the time, I'm telling you right now, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. Not really. But if you're always doing this, that means your technical factors are off. You shouldn't have to be windowing the image all the time because it narrows the manipulation that the radiologist can do on their end. So I used to do MRI, I used to do CT, X-ray, flow, and I tried not to go ahead and manipulate the images as much as possible. So now that you do the windowing, this is known as post-processing manipulation. Okay? So I'm going to put that up here because you're manipulating the image. So post-processing manipulation means that you're manipulating the image after it's been processed. It's only processed once, but now you're changing it around, correct? So now we have window level, window width. We have shuttering. Let's say you want to add a note to it and you want to put an annotation. An annotation is adding text. You shouldn't be adding your markers on an annotation. Shame on you. Okay, a lot of techs get in the bad habit of putting the annotation on it, right? And I get it. Sometimes the markers come off. Sometimes the markers are obscured by the anatomy or the scatter, that burns them out, or sometimes you collimate them out, and that's okay. Things happen, but you should still be using your marker, left and right side position markers. But annotation is adding text. I remember when I was doing ER procedures, I used to put status post fall, rule out fracture of scaphoid. Patient had an elbow injury, and I'll put a little marker or something, an arrow showing the injury where the pathology of interest was. So this is all part of post-process manipulation. We have, you can flip it, you can rotate it, you can have inversion of image, invert, where you invert the densities, where you make it look like a negative. You can have stitching. Okay, if I can spell it right? So stitching is where it sews electronically two body parts together. Back in the days, we had a film and we had this Bell-Thompson ruler that we did for measuring the limb, and we had to take separate x-rays. But now with digital systems, you can take multiple images, and especially in orthopedics, the system can electronically sew them together. So you don't have to have either long films or a ruler. We can actually just do it separately. The system will do it for us. It even has a template for it for doing like hip replacements and ORIFs and things like that. It's pretty amazing, guys. Technology is amazing. But we have stitching, we have inversion of image. This is great for PICC lines, central venous catheters. It's good to see if like a Swan-Ganz or something, guys, you want to make sure that it's in the superior vena cava, pacemaker placement, tracheal tubes, lines, catheters. We'll leave it at that. But inversion of the image is really good to demonstrate that. We have stitching, flip, rotate, angle. We have true size. It might say 1:1, and you can actually get the true size of the object. But all of that is post-processing manipulation. Now, let's say you critique the image. You look at the exposure, density, the contrast. You look to see if the spatial resolution is there. It doesn't have a lot of distortion. There's no artifacts, no unwanted information. Let's say you're happy with the image. You're happy with the image now. So now you want to hit save. Now, when you save them, the format that you're going to save these images, the format is going to be in DICOM format. It's considered to be the universal standard for our images. We were talking the other day and we said another form is JPEG, but that's not a universal standard. And that was actually an issue because not all systems can read JPEG, right? We've had sometimes images in Canvas, and if they're JPEG, Canvas doesn't read JPEG. So again, DICOM is a universal standard or format of how it's saved. Now the place that it's saved in, right now we're still using PACS. There's another system that has replaced that, but I'll leave that for another discussion. But the place that you save them in is PACS, all right? It's PACS. Now let's say you as a tech added some tech notes. You put a history. The images and the tech notes and the history are gonna go to PACS. Now the PACS, if you have a doctor, not even inside the room, but outside, but they're connected to the same area network, they're within the same building, local area network, so you have something called LEN. You can go ahead and have the doctor read it, right? Hey doc, you know what? I got a stat image. Can you go ahead and read this for me? It's patient, medical record number this. Or doctor's looking at it, he or she is looking at it, and they're going to say, you know what? Okay, and they're going to dictate a report. They dictate a report. So now the report is going to be in the PACS system. So PACS stands for Picture Archival Communication Systems. It's going to store the images, the tech notes, history. If you took a history, which most places do require that, it's going to have the dictated report. All of that can be accessed through the PACS system. So let's say the doctor is not there. I remember working in an area, and 70 miles away was the doctors that were on call. It was the middle of the night. I think I did a brain circle of Willis or something, MRI, and I had to contact the radiologist on call. I was in Palmdale, they're in Orange County, and guess what? They're nowhere near the facility. But because they were connected to our PACS system, they had access to the images, they were able to dictate a report, and then I went to go ahead and make sure that the stat was recorded by the ER physicians. So that was by a wide area network. Okay, so we have a local area network, and then we have what's called a wide area network. So the wide area network can be using satellite, fiber optic cables, but they're not in the area. Now, if the radiologist is reading from outside the facility, that's called teleradiology. So teleradiology is reading of the images from outside the facility. Well, we have telemedicine now thanks to COVID, right? So we have the ability to go ahead and access a patient and treat them over a phone, a Zoom, some type of computer system. Well, we have teleradiology, which used to use phone lines, but now we're able to go ahead, doctors can pull them up on iPads and take a look at images and give a stat reading and a report on that, and they're outside of the facility. So that's teleradiology. So DICOM and PACS, HIS, RIS are all part of what's called informatics. These are digital imaging informatics, okay? So platforms that are used to go ahead and save the images, transmit information, retrieve the images, retrieve information. All these are part of DR informatics, okay? So at the end of the day, you send me on my way, images are sent to the doctor, they're interpreted, the exams are given a report, and then from there, the treatment is given for the patient, correct? And all of this, you guys, through digital imaging processing, okay? So I'm hoping that this will help you. I know I didn't go into a lot of detail, but I'm giving you guys the process of what's happening every time those x-rays are done, okay? All right, thank you.